Well, welcome back, folks. Another episode of Two Chaps, Many Cultures, the world's number one. We'll say it again. Number one. Along with my miming partner, the world's number one show on the business of culture and the culture of business. Welcome along. It is the start of Ramadan, by the way. Ramadan Mubarak for our wonderful Muslim friends and brothers and sisters around the world. And today, although, we're going to talk about the brain, and which is something we all have to certain degrees of size. Mine a little bit smaller than the others, but I'm fascinated. I think all people are fascinated, especially in relation to how that makes us think, act, and interact with each other across the world when it comes to intercultural leadership, all these kind of things. And we have somebody with a much bigger brain than both of us put together, probably, to talk on this today. So stick around. It's going to be fun.
Did you again say that my brain was small? Is that what you
Well, in balance, we probably even each other out. I'm learning from you, you're learning from me.
I have to tilt my head a little bit. There's no balance for the brain matter to slide to one side.
Is that right brain or left brain? That's what I want.
Who knows? In my case, it's lost cause anyway.
Well, as we said, welcome along, everybody. Yes, we have a wonderful episode ahead for you. We've got a wonderful friend of ours who's come to teach us, as she always does, on this topic. And but before we get into it, yes, as I said, it is Ramadan, so another wonderful celebration that's starting around the world. What else has happened today? Nothing else yet. I mean, it's pretty early in the morning, so.
Hey, don't ask me. I don't scour the news like you do every morning. I'm happy to be alive. I walked the dog and saw 2 deer in the forest. How's that for news?
Well done, well done. But no doubt your brain was actively engaged, even though you were doing a physical activity. You were probably shouting at the dog and looking out for dangers and deers and that kind of thing. So that probably brought in a certain amount of just being aware of your surroundings, being aware of how we react. And of course, as we said in the description, your brain basically runs it all, doesn't it? And I guess,
some of it, I guess.
Some of it
on autopilot.
Yeah,
I've heard it's called the reptilian brain, but I'm sure that's kitchen table psychology. So I'm glad we have somebody who knows better.
Absolutely.
It's a wonderful colleague and much, much smarter person, as Brett rightfully said. So let's get out of the way and clear the way for Miss Shannon Murphy. Welcome.
Thank you, Kristen. Thank you, Brett. It's great to get to be here with both of you.
Thanks for making time for us.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Welcome. And as Christian said, you're a colleague, a friend, and a mentor to many people when it comes to kind of making us understand how the brain works, how neuroscience comes into play when we're trying to learn about how we respond, but also maybe how we teach, how we pass information on and lead in this intercultural world. So, I mean, first of all, let's start at the start. What brought you to this work? What made you kind of think about this from a neurological standpoint?
That's a good question, because it was never a conscious plan until life happens, as it often does. And suddenly we find, we think we're in one direction, and it's almost like a pool table where we think our ball is heading in one direction, and then the cue ball comes and smacks you and you go in a different direction. It was one of those cosmic smack moments. 13 years ago already, which is hard to believe. And it was when my youngest daughter, Annabelle, was born with Down syndrome. And when she was born, the little bit that I thought I knew about Down syndrome turned out to all be wrong. Old stereotypes, old misinformation, all through this lens of lack and limitation, can't, won't. For those of you that are parents, no one wants that as a starting point for their child. And so I was like, no, No way. There's got to be a better way. And so her first year of life was this crash course where I was reading anything and everything I could from, she has trisomy 21, which is the most common form of Down syndrome. And for those of you that aren't familiar with it, tune in to Brett and Christian's episode with Basma and Volley. They did a brilliant episode on differabilities. So log into that one, it'll get you up to speed. And so it was trying to put my arms around, so there's this extra chromosome, what does it mean? And especially as a parent, how do I help her be who she's fully here to be? And so this crash course I did of reading everything and everything from genetics to cellular biology to biochemistry to the neuroscience. And I had the opportunity to go and study at a place in Philadelphia called the Institutes for the Achievement of Human Potential. That's all based on neuroplasticity and that ability of the brain to change and rewire. And the more I learned, the more excited I got, because I realized this wasn't helpful just for Annabelle. This was helpful for all of us, because how many of you have heard by the time you're an adult, you know, what you have is what you have. And if you partied in school, those brain cells were dropping off dead and we're kind of screwed, basically. You know, we've all heard that, right? And the good news is that's not true. Well, okay, so alcohol is still a neurotoxin. We do have that. But here's the good news. Your brain builds new brain cells or new neurons every single day. Your brain builds new neural pathways, new connections every single day of your adult life. And now that we understand more about it, we can consciously intervene in how those pathways get laid down. And that, to me, is what I found just beyond exciting. I found it hopeful, because I've been in the DEI and cultural agility space for a long time. And like many of you, had these frustrations where it would feel like 2 steps forward, 1 step back, as I'd work with different clients and they'd hit these walls of, and then in terms of how do you really create sustained behavior change? And so that's where I found this just incredibly hopeful, because it suddenly illuminated a path that we hadn't looked at before through DEI and cultural agility. And so that's the path I started running down. Was never planned, but here I am.
So can you define for those of us who are not as smart what neuroplasticity exactly entails?
Absolutely, Christian. And it has nothing to do with smart. It's just building knowledge and skills, like we all do in the work.
Feels so much better now.
This is why we love Shannon. She's so kind to us. She's so
What's that, Brett?
I said, yeah, this is why we love you. You're so kind to us.
Of course. And the neuroplasticity is the ability of the brain to change and rewire. So basically, the neurons are the brain cells. And for every time we learn something, every time we think a thought, we learn a new action or behavior, the more we think that thought or repeat that action or behavior, those neurons start to form a physical connection in the brain. It's called Hebb's law, where the neurons that wire together, fire together, or fire together, wire together. And so these neurons form these connections, and you can get hundreds and hundreds of neurons all connected around one piece of learning or one behavior. Now, here's where the brain can work both for us and against us, because that's a very important theme when it comes to inclusion and cultural agility in the brain. And that is that these neural pathways, once they're formed, they become unconscious, and we can do it on autopilot. Now, there's an upside to that. You know, how many of you, you know, Brett or Brett or Kristen, did either of you this morning have to think about, how do I brush my teeth?
Nope.
How do I make my coffee? Unless you have a brand new coffee maker and you're trying to figure it out, you know? No, because once you've learned those pathways are so solid in the brain, you can do it on autopilot. So you're probably brushing your teeth or doing your coffee, and you're thinking about your day. You're thinking about the deer. You're thinking about the walk with your dog, because the brain isn't having to put any energy into that once they're formed. Now, it takes a lot of energy for the brain to form those neural pathways. Once they're established, it becomes incredibly efficient for the brain because they can go on autopilot. You know, it's like back when we all used to be able to work in offices and driving to, office or coming home from work. Well, I'll often ask people, how many of you have a conscious recollection? Like you get home, you're standing in your kitchen and you have a conscious recollection of the drive. And they're like, no. Those are those neural pathways working for you. Now, have either of you had the privilege of teaching a new driver that's just learning?
Teenage daughters, yes.
Yes, exactly. I've got 3 daughters, and so I've been down that road with the first 2, and it's a little scary because there's no neural pathways while they're building those skills. And if you've been an experienced driver, you have so much unconscious competence because you've got patterns upon patterns, maps upon maps in the brain around how to operate the vehicle, how to drive, all those things, and all the things that you pay attention to that now happen very unconsciously. So my daughter was driving, and it was like a 3-lane, 40-mile-an-hour kind of stressful street for her because she'd just been doing smaller streets by that point. And we get onto this busier road, and I can tell the car in front of her is going to pull in front of her. And I was like, Rachel, slow down. That car is going to cut right in front of you. Sure enough, they did. They hadn't signaled. And she looked at me and she's like, how did you know that?
Yeah.
And I had to really pause and think about it because, again, that's those neural pathways working for you. And I had to think about it and break it down consciously. And I said, I saw them look, but they only kind of half looked or they would have seen you. And then I saw the wheels start to turn. So then I knew they were coming over. But I had to really stop and slow that process down and think about it. Because once those pathways are formed, we don't have to think about it. And again, that's the good news. That's the bad news.
Yeah, so how do we untangle those that don't serve us? I mean, there's...
Exactly, Christian. You can have, that's where, for instance, unconscious bias can be so challenging because your unconscious brain processes over 11 million bits of incoming sensory data every single second. Think about all the images we're exposed to, all the messages that we're exposed to, and our conscious brain can pay attention to about 40 to 60 bits is what most neuroscientists estimate. So that's a whole lot of information that your unconscious brain is processing and laying down in those neural pathways without your conscious participation.
Say those numbers again, 40 to 60 bit consciously, and how many bits are
over 11 million.
11 million per second, you said?
Yes, every second.
And we can handle 40 to 60. All right. Talk about overload. So
exactly. Exactly.
So,
and it is overload. And that's also part of what's happening because we're so inundated. I mean, you can't even go to the gas station and pump gas without the little screen popping up and stuff playing, and then the radio's going. And, the other day I was like, wow, you can't even go and pump gas without stuff just being bombarded that the unconscious brain is processing. Some neuroscientists think it's even higher than that. And once the ability to measure it gets more and more sophisticated, there's some that think it's going to be even higher.
Do we know, I mean, I don't know how long this has been measured. Is there a human evolution that younger generations or as Homo sapiens progresses with the technology that we've created for ourselves, has our ability, our brain's ability to keep up with the progress we create for ourselves, has our brain been able to keep up with that? Do we process faster than our great-grandparents did? And is there a way to show that, or do we not have the data?
Yes, and no. So there isn't the longitudinal data yet. Yes, we're processing more because it's demanded of us than, say, our grandparents' generation. And I even see that with, my kids, for instance, and how they've built those neural pathways. They can whip stuff out with their thumbs on their smartphones with lightning speed, where I look at them in awe. I'm like, how did you do that so fast? Or they're like, sweep, shoot. Whereas for me, I can, I navigate it just fine, but I don't have the speed that they have, but
Right.
they've grown up with it more. And so they've built a lot more neural pathways around it. And one of the challenges is exactly that, Christian, that we're being bombarded with more information, more input, more overall sensory input than we've ever had to deal with, when you look at long term. And what some neuroscientists are saying now is what is going to help differentiate the successful leaders of the future is they learn how to train the brain's attention and how to focus attention, because attention is getting torn apart in so many different ways. It was really interesting when I did my advanced certification at Harvard with Dr. Srini Pillai, who teaches at the medical school. And he talked about that because he said, we only have so many, only so much attention at any one time. And he said, when we're inundated and it's getting, parceled here, there, as leaders, we're far less effective because our attention is being drawn in so many different places, and that it actually burns up a lot of brain energy as well. And so what he said is absolutely going to be a critical leadership skill is the ability to train the brain's attention and to really focus.
How do
I
we
think
do that?
yeah.
Do you know how to do that? Can you teach us? I want that.
You can train the brain to do that. You can train the brain, even for instance, to pay attention to brain energy as part of that, because when our brain energy is low, it's hard to focus your attention. And what's interesting with brain energy is we get more or less a set amount of brain energy to spend each day. It's relatively fixed in the brain. And once we use it up, we use it up. And we can get smarter about how we proactively manage our brain's energy. So for instance, things that can drain brain energy really quickly, attempting to multitask, because the brain can't, and it's well researched now, the brain can't effectively do two cognitive tasks at the same time. What it's actually doing is what's called rapid task switching, where I focus here, now I focus here, now I focus here, now I focus here, but I'm still kind of focused here, now I'm focused over here, and we burn through a ton of brain energy. Unmanaged emotions, really strong unmanaged emotions, burn through a ton of brain energy. Think about, like, if you've ever been upset with something, have either of you ever gotten thought in what we call a negative thinking feeling loop, where you're kind of replaying the story in your head, kind of churning it?
Find it incredibly hard to focus on a task if that happens.
Yes, because you're using a ton of brain energy. Also things like when you're doing a lot of heavy cognitive lifting, like something that requires a lot of analysis. For instance, like if you've ever had a project where you're knee deep into spreadsheets and doing all kinds of analysis, and then you come up for a breath of air and you're like, oh, I feel wiped. And then you look at your watch and it's 10 a.m. It's like, oh no, I still have a whole day ahead of me. What am I going to do? And so you've used a lot of brain energy. What resets brain energy is a good night's sleep. That's what fully resets brain energy. And then during the day, we can boost it. Exercise, diet, all have a huge impact. Meditation shown to boost brain energy, and then we can also be more conscious in our choices of how we respond to things. And let me give you an example of that. When my middle daughter, Rachel, was in middle school, in her middle school, they had all their classes. It was like 7 different classes, all in one giant binder. So she has this massive binder with every single subject in it. And it's before school. I had to drop her off that day and then go to a client because I needed to be at the client site early to set up to be ready to train. That morning, I'm not sure why, my daughter decided that was the perfect time to reorganize her binder. Yeah, exactly. You get where this is going. I walk into the kitchen and I see papers all over the table. And my first immediate, I was like, oh, I could feel my heart starting to go. I could feel myself literally starting to go in a stress response because I'm looking at what she's doing. And I look at the clock and I'm like, there's no way There is no way she is going to be ready to go. And then my mind starts spinning, we're going to be late. I can't be late, you know? And so then instead of going down that route, I made a very conscious choice because I knew, one, it would drain my brain energy. And if I went into a stress response, it was going to make me less effective for when I showed up for my client and how I wanted to be present fully for my client. And it wasn't going to set my daughter up for a good morning at school if I went down that path, which is where my brain wanted to go and my body wanted to go. And instead I had to kick in what Daniel Kahneman would call system 2 and override that and say, you know, and so instead I came at it completely differently. And I looked at her and I said, how much longer do you think you need? Because we'll need to leave soon. And she looked at the table with everything. She looked at the clock. She was like, I don't have time for this right now. She put it all back in her binder and out the door we went. And that was a very conscious choice because I wanted to be aware of both my state and my brain energy. And I knew the price tag if I didn't manage that choice well. Because it was going to put me in a brain state that wasn't going to be helpful or set me up to do my best work.
Absolutely.
That is something. Go ahead, Brett.
Oh, no. I think that's we feel ourselves doing this all the time, don't we? I mean, you know what? You want to stop it. You want, you know that you shouldn't do it, but that overwhelming feeling to just really kind of like blow up and go, my God, that's the only way we're going to achieve all these tasks that I know that are in my brain is if I push and yell and I don't know. It's just but after you do that, you just feel drained. It's a great observation.
You do, because it takes a lot. It's very draining. And that's why, in fact, Mary Casey, who's the co-founder of Brain Skills with me, that's why we created the brain states management model, because we thought it would be really helpful for people to understand how choice, self-awareness, and perception aren't static in the brain, but they're very much dependent on, you know, if that fear circuitry is engaging, if that stress response is engaging in the brain and starts to bring us down, you know, that what can sometimes be a very quick, slippery slope. And yet, if we're going to be inclusive, if we're going to be culturally agile, if we're going to be our highest and best selves as leaders, we need to be in that prefrontal cortex, or what we call that higher brain. And as soon as, you know, the stress response starts to kick in, or anything that's activating the fear circuitry in the brain starts to kick in, that prefrontal cortex is easily destabilized and we start to lose access. And again, this is what's really helpful, is we can train ourselves to notice that and to be able to recognize and shift our state much more effectively.
I think it's a practice, and I catch myself to snap. I catch myself being in effect rather than being at cause, right? So I notice that of myself, and for me it's a constant practice to remind myself that I'm a representative of the only species on this planet that has a choice in its behaviors, right? I do not have to give in to instinct. I can decide, do I want to do this, or would I rather do this, and which course of action promises a better outcome? And that doesn't always happen, right? So I have, because the reflex, the knee jerk is autopilot. That's so much easier than to have that pause button in your brain, say, oh, wait up, what's best here? Is this how I'm going to say it? Is this how I'm going to respond? And I know of myself that sometimes that works, that I can suspend my knee jerk. Sometimes it doesn't, right? And then I notice it after the fact that, dang it, I coulda, shoulda, woulda, right?
Yeah. Welcome to being human.
Right. Now we have Maria asking an interesting question, and I have an answer to that because she's addressing my native culture at least a little bit. She says, does the brain of multitasking Italians work differently from step-by-step working Germans, for example? Yes, a multitasking brain consumes brain energy, but can we say that brains of societies that are typically multitasking are better trained to multitask? or is it a quote unquote bad habit in any case? So, Shannon, I'm going to let you take a first stab at this before I address the Germans.
Well, can I add to that in the terms of, like, we use polychronic and monochronic, like people that are able, I think you mentioned it well, like switching is one thing that can be interpreted as multitasking, but it just seems some cultures have the ability to be able to maybe do that switching, stop, focus really quickly, switch to something else and switch back. So I just want to kind of add to that, and because it's a great question that Maria's asking here.
Yeah, it is. And there's a couple elements to it. One is that culture gets laid down in those neural pathways in such a deep, deep level. So when we talk about deep culture, it's literally shaped those neural pathways in the brain. And so how the Germans operate, how the Italians operate, those neural pathways are going to be completely different, and how they show up and how they see things and how they process things. That's what the cultural neuroscience studies are showing now, how deeply that's wired in the brain. So a lot of the things that we've seen in the behavioral studies are absolutely showing up now in some of the cultural neuroscience studies. So when you think about someone who has grown up in a very polychronic culture, for instance, that's wired in those pathways. What becomes the difference is what you alluded to, Christian, and that is, how present are you? So there might be a lot of things going on, but if I can put my attention here for a moment with you and be completely present with you, 30 seconds later, Brett's saying something and I switch my attention to Brett and I'm completely present with Brett. You don't lose brain energy that way. In fact, what's interesting, on our brain states of management profile, it's a self-assessment that we do that gives people insight into their brain states. Brain energy is usually one of the lowest of all 7 dimensions. We measure 7 different neuroscience-based dimensions, and brain energy across the board is almost always the lowest. And I had a really interesting exception, which reminds me of exactly what you're talking about, Maria. And that is, there was a leader of a call center. Now, think about a call center for a moment. I mean, talk about inundated, chaotic, just stuff coming at you nonstop. And she was the leader of this call center, and her brain energy score was one of the highest that I've seen. And I was a bit dumbfounded when I saw it. And I was doing the one-on-one coaching with her, because we were working with both the group and then the one-on-one individually. And it made sense when I talked to her, because I told her, I said, this is usually the lowest for most leaders. And so I'm beyond curious to know, why do you think this is your highest and so high for you? Because hers was way, way, way up in the green. And it was interesting because as we talked, she has done a phenomenal job of being able to train the brain's attention, so that whatever is in front of her in that moment, it has her full undivided attention. Then 30 seconds later, the next crisis comes to her. It has her full undivided attention. So she has done just a phenomenal, ties back to the attention piece that we were talking about earlier. She's just done a phenomenal job of training herself to have her attention be fully present.
Now, what would you answer? Because when Maria, I'm going to bring up the question again for those of you who are tuning in after the fact. Maria is bringing up some country culture comparisons, and specifically about Italians and Germans. Now, being a German myself, I know quite a few of my fellow Germans who tend to be quite multitasking, and I know from working with dozens of Italians that I've met several of them who are very linear in their time management approach, who do not multitask. So if we say that a culture leaves neuroscientific imprint on our neural pathways, which I'm not disagreeing with at all. How do we explain the variance, right? So this has been something that cultural comparison frameworks have had to deal with ever since 𝙏𝙬𝙤 that we have these nation culture comparisons, and yet they don't always match up, because we find in every nation culture, if there is such a thing to begin with, we find variants of certain behaviors and certain habits. So how do we explain that from a neuroscientific standpoint?
Probably the easiest way to explain that, Christian, the single, I think, largest aspect of diversity in the world is the brain. No two brains are wired alike,
Right.
period. And so when you think about diversity, I mean, it can't get any more diverse than that. No two brains, even when they've done studies on identical twins that have grown up in the exact same family, they're identical twins, DNA, everything's a match. The wiring that gets laid down is different. Mm-hmm. Because then our life experiences get laid down in those neural pathways. The messages we get from our immediate family, from extended family, from media. I mean, all these other things that can influence how those neural pathways get shaped.
Got it.
And so that's where absolutely, you can have some cultural tendencies like we talk about in the intercultural field, but there'll always be variance in any given aspect.
Also, so you've alluded to the fact that you've kind of measured brain energy, because you're obviously working with clients where you're using tools. So what are there specific tools you measure this? Does this mean being wired up to a machine or something like that? Or,
I would imagine in a neuroscience lab, they probably have that degree. Ours is a bit more low tech, right, where it's really starting to pay attention to things like diet, sleep, exercise, emotional management, things like that we know from the research all impact brain energy. And so, for instance, in the brain states awareness profile, one of the dimensions looks at brain energy. So it asks people questions around their sleep, their diet, their exercise, things like that. So you can start to see. So like if you have someone that has a huge sleep deficit, for instance, absolutely, that's going to be impacting their brain energy. In fact, it's interesting because after I started reading a lot of the sleep studies, I completely shifted how I prioritize sleep. I mean, I used to never sleep. In fact, I joke with people. I was like, I'll sleep when I'm dead. Who needs sleep? And then after reading the sleep studies and the impact on cognitive performance, as well as just overall, well-being, I was like, whoa, okay, I'm repatterning that habit. And I have, and it's made a big difference. And so there's things that we know will absolutely drain brain energy. And then there's things that we know from the research that will absolutely help manage brain energy more proactively. One of the simple tools that we give people is a brain energy log, where we have them when we're doing longer trainings. We have them like over the course of 3 days, start to notice and train themselves to notice their energy levels and notice. And so pausing at different points during the day and just putting a little entry into their log and saying, yeah, exactly. Like you track your sleep, you see the impact. Same idea, track what you eat, track your level of exercise. If you're going to do one thing to help your brain the most, it's exercise. Mm-hmm. The studies are amazing. Even when they take people that have never exercised, they start them on just a simple, like 20 minutes, 30 minutes, 3-4 times a week, the gray matter literally grows in the brain. And so there's a lot that we can just be smarter about is really what it comes down to, and just build our awareness to manage ourselves better. Because I look at it in terms of when we make a commitment to be our highest and best self, as much as we can, then that can become a touch point for, okay, what do I need to be aware of? What's helping me do that? What's getting in the way of me doing that? You know, I know, for instance, when I've got a whole bunch of training, I am very aware of what I eat, because I know if I eat junk, I'm
Yep.
not going to feel good. I'm not going to feel as sharp. I'm not going to my overall body energy isn't going to be feeling as good. So it's just starting to notice what's true for you, you know, for each person, because
Right.
it's going to be, of course, different from person to person to person.
Yeah, nutrition. I noticed that too when I do multi-day events or full-day events, and back in the day when we did that in hotels, right, when lunch and meals were catered, and there was, I mean, there's, you know, the spreads in North American hotels, and I usually only pick the light salad for lunch, and people will look at me like, "Hey, have some of this, have some of that." I say, "Yeah, I know better," but because in the past I did, and it didn't help my energy. So the meat coma or the post-lunch slump, that isn't just imagined. That is, in fact, a direct correlation between our food processing system and our brain, right?
Oh, yeah, because then you get into, you know, which is how quickly your body converts what you're eating to sugar. You
Right.
know, and that's where, I mean, how many of you have been training? I mean, especially in the US, where they do like a pasta lunch because it's cheap and, and easy. And then after, you know, 20 minutes, 30 minutes after lunch, everyone's like, you know,
Yep. Exactly.
they're going into complete just food snooze. And so, yeah, absolutely. And so we can, but we can, like I say, like I loved Maria's comment about when she started tracking her sleep, of noticing that, because, and this is building, because self-awareness isn't static in the brain. One, it's dependent on what brain, you know, how much the fear circuitry is dominating in the moment, and how that's activating or firing up, say, the limbic system, or even a full-blown fight, flight, freeze threat response. But also, we can build our self-awareness in terms of what is called metacognition, that ability to think about our thinking and to notice our state. Now, metacognition can absolutely be strengthened. And from a cultural perspective, there's a lot of benefit in doing that. In fact, studies will show, and metacognition is simply a fancy term for being able to think about your thinking, to notice your thinking, notice your emotions, notice your reactions, and be able to be aware of that. Now, there's been some really interesting studies that have looked at people that, for instance, get cultural knowledge. You know, think of like going through, you know, different aspects of here's what you need to know about different cultures, or maybe it's a culture specific training if someone's relocating or something like that. What they have found is if people get the cultural information, but they do not have good metacognitive skills, they're more likely to stereotype. Whereas if people have good metacognitive skills and they get that information, they're much more able to adapt and be culturally agile.
Got it. Makes sense.
Yeah, it does. It does. You know, and the same is true with inclusion. You know, we can't really manage our biases and assumptions, and the brain is a bias making machine. You know, so to think we can be bias free is just not even an option. You know, it's over like 175 or more different kind of biases the brain can employ at any one time. So metacognition becomes really important to say, okay, it's not that I can be bias free, that doesn't exist, to instead say, okay, there probably is bias. Where is it?
Right. The
Let
bias
me
is
look
basically a
for it.
result of our filtering process, right? I mean, 40 to 60 bit compared to 11 million. So our brains automatically develop biases in order for us to function quickly on autopilot, and undoing some of those biases that may have served us as a 6-year-old may not serve us as a 16, 26, 86-year-old, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And there can also be biases that maybe have never served us, but because, again, that 11 million bits of incoming information, sensory data, it's been captured in the unconscious brain. Now, let me ask you, how many times do you think the unconscious brain needs to see an image or a message to create a new bias? What would you guess?
Probably once. I don't know.
You're close, Christian. as little as twice.
Twice. Wow.
Because the first time the brain sees something, it's somewhat new, but the second time it sees it, it feels familiar. And familiarity in the brain signals cognitive truth or ease. And so then it feels true to the brain. And because the brain operates on heuristics or these shortcuts,
right.
And from an unconscious bias perspective, I mean, we can have biases. Again, if we were exposed to the message somewhere along the way, even if we don't consciously agree with it, it can still be sitting in our brains. If any of you are Harry Potter fans, and you know how they can pull out a memory and look at it in the pensieve, you can have biases in your brain that if you could pull it out and look at it, you'd be horrified, because you could look at that bias and say, I don't even agree with that.
Yep.
That doesn't fit my values. That doesn't fit my beliefs. That doesn't fit who I am. What is that doing in my brain?
That's why it's so confronting, right? And that's why doing the work of even exposing the idea of this to other people and ourselves is confronting, and it can bring in, again, right? We kind of bring in that kind of fear response, right? It can go, this threatens me. This threatens what I thought of myself. The very person that I'm most intimate with is the person I look at in the mirror every day. Right. And when you're confronted by the biases in that person, then it can be a very confronting thing. So it's I don't know. I mean, there's so much here you can unpack. I mean, that's why I find this fascinating. I think it's just and it's why we, if you really want the best for the people you lead and your family and all those things, all those people around you, I don't know. I could go down a lot. We could be here all day talking about this. I'm sorry. I'm going to.
And I think part of the fun. Absolutely part of the fun. And what you were saying too, Brett.
Shannon, real quick. Sorry. Let me honor some of the comments. I don't want the people who are watching to feel that we're not listening. So Ana Luisa Romero says, metacognition, meditating about your thinking, witnessing what you're thinking with awareness. To which Anthony is responding, is that another way of saying self-awareness? Is that, Shannon?
It is, but it's almost like a slice of self-awareness.
All right.
Is the way I think about it. We have to have metacognition to have a deeper level of self-awareness.
Right.
Maybe that's a way to think about it.
Good. Thank you for that. And Antimo, who could defend his Italian brothers and sisters, says this should be a dialogue discussion of foundational basis in everybody's education early on in life. Yes. How come this isn't taught in our average curricula? Why are we still holding on to cognition levels of 100 years ago?
Yeah, that's a good question. In part, it's still a relatively new field. And again, when you talk about, we could do a whole nother session on change in the brain. That's again where those neural pathways can work for us and against us. I do see the neuroscience starting to go into education, and people are starting to pay attention to the brain and how that shows up. Even with one of my clients that was elementary school, it was really interesting having the conversations with them after we went through multiple series of trainings with them. And they took the profile and we had all kinds of different applications. And then they even took our book, The Neuroscience of Inclusion, and we drilled into each chapter with, okay, how do you apply this to your school, to what you do? And it was amazing the things that they came up with. And even things like they talked about, like students where rather than just going to say that their behavior is a distraction and counterproductive, and they should just be taken out of the classroom, for instance, for an intervention, they said, maybe we can look at it differently. Maybe their body needs some movement. Maybe they need a brain break. Maybe, you know, so they realize, they're like, you know, we have a treadmill, we could move it, blah, blah, blah. And then that could become a student break. And, you know, it was just interesting the way it started to open up their thinking of what they could do. And, you know, that's a whole nother path, because then also you get into, you know, even applying into an educational system. How do you create that sense of belonging? Because that's so critical for the brain. You know, I think about that even with Annabelle, when she was mainstreamed and she was the only child with Down syndrome or no, there was one other child with a visible physical disability, but everybody else would have been hidden, different abilities, not readily visible for other kids, which I'm sure were in the school. And it was interesting because in kindergarten, it was like they made all these adaptations for her before really understanding what she needed. And so she had her own desk. She wasn't sitting at the tables with all the other students. They had brought in like all these materials for her to work with and all these different things. And I just found it so frustrating as a parent, because I thought every single day she walks into that classroom, she knows she's different from everybody else in that classroom, just the way they have set it up for her. And so it was like this bit of a battle with the school. And in fact, they even wanted us to take her out of the school and put her in the district's special ed program, which was at a different school. And we refused. And because when she got to first grade, she was going to be with the same teaching team for first through fifth grade that our middle daughter was in. And they asked if she would come to the school. And so I thought, wow, 2 teachers that are excited to have her for 5 years and work with her. Yeah, we'll put up with kindergarten until we can get there. And it was interesting because when we got to first grade and I met with the 2 teachers, because I knew them, you know, from my older daughter, and we had an amazing relationship. They're just phenomenal human beings. And I said to them, I said, can we take away every single adaptation? Put her at a table with all the other students, let her be doing, and then as the needs come up, we can assess what's going to help her succeed. And it was like a light switch.
Yep.
The difference, her school experience just changed dramatically.
And I'm sure it changed the experience of the teaching staff as well, because they saw a different response from a student.
It did.
And what was they recognized that what didn't work or what they did before was not serving the need of that student to its full potential.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, also the other kids, right? The other kids are watching this. They're learning this and just, you know, just accepting the other person, every child, every other little friend at the table, as opposed to what you're saying. Yes, your daughter would feel separate, but then the rest of the class would see, oh, this is somebody that's different. So therefore those biases are baked in as they grow up, and say anybody that's different needs to be set apart. And that's a really, it's a damaging thing, right? Well,
and then it's because this is part of the challenge for the brain. The brain has this inherent us-them bias, and it prefers people that look like us. And we have to consciously stretch those boundaries of the brain to include more and more people, more aspects of difference that we can build our comfort with. And so you're exactly right, because then in that classroom, all the other students, you know, became more comfortable with Annabelle as well. And as she built friendships with a lot of them, you know, it also stretches their brains to say, this is Annabelle. I mean, so, you know, she's my friend, you know, it's you're now, I see you.
Yeah.
You're no longer my brain saying you're an other.
And then wouldn't they then see if there's particular situations where they could help to accommodate or make those changes themselves? It's not up to the teachers, and it's not up to the kids actually then say, wow, I've got an opportunity to serve somebody and help them if I feel they're struggling, because I'm probably going to get the same from Annabelle as well. You know, she'll see when I'm struggling, and so it's a two-way street.
I mentioned this on the episode we had with Basma and Vali, that my wife owns a Montessori school. She actually founded this Montessori school, and part of her teaching staff came in through a collaboration with a Differability Institute, right? So we had one young woman who worked as a staffer at my wife's school who is on the spectrum, and another staffer is a Down syndrome woman. And the kids in the ages from, well, toddler age all the way up to 5th grade, they were interacting with these adults the same way. They didn't see them as a differability adult, or now the special person is coming to do something with me. No, they were part of the staff. And it was, I don't like the word, but it was normalized for these kids because they didn't even question the fact that these people were there, right?
Yeah, exactly. And that will get laid down in those neural pathways, and that will again start to stretch that who do I see as like me or that I'm comfortable with? Because when a difference is unfamiliar or a difference causes discomfort, that's what triggers that away response in the brain, and it shows up in all the unconscious behavior without us even realizing it. And when we can do the work to make differences more familiar and more comfortable, then it's easier for the social circuitry in the brain to engage. It's easier to move toward that individual and create a genuine connection, you know, with care and compassion and empathy and, you know, showing up the way we want to be as human beings. But we actually have to do the work to do that, or be lucky like those kids are, Christian, in your wife's Montessori school, where it's just part of the environment already.
Yeah, it was beautiful for me to watch, because I noticed myself, I was uncomfortable at first. I was like, is this gonna work? And I mean, I didn't say it in those words to my wife, but she could sense that. I was like, how sure are you about this? And she was like, very sure, just watch. And so I noticed that I got, even though I was not a student or staff in my wife's school, I was just observing as a parent of our own kids who attended our own school. I'm like, is this going to work? And the beauty of it working and experiencing it and how it showed up and how the kids rallied around all of their teachers was something that broke down one of my biases, because I was brought up with an old school mindset around engaging with people of different abilities, right? So I was brought up the way you described the kindergarten setup. There's a special place and the special conditions made for those with special needs. And when I saw that challenged, I was confronted with my own bias.
Yeah. And that was true for the school my daughter was in. Now, interestingly, fast forward 2 years later, we're at her IEP meeting, which is their progress meeting, and they thanked us. And they said, you showed us what inclusion can look like. And when my middle daughter graduated from 5th grade, because it's a Montessori-based model, it's 1st through 5th grade with a male-female teaching team, and then they loop through the 1st through 3rd, 3rd through 5th, but they do a lot together, the multi-age, which is why we chose that program for them. The teachers acknowledged my middle daughter, and they said, you showed us how to have high expectations for Annabelle. You showed us how to be inclusive. You showed us how to expect her best and allow her to thrive.
This is the word for the week. For all of you watching, we expect the best of all of you, including ourselves.
Absolutely.
And we can, you know, we can all make a commitment to our highest and best self and what that looks like and who I want to be. And no, yeah, sometimes my brain might trip me up. I might fall a little short, and in the next moment I can make a new choice.
Absolutely.
Choices.
No better mic drop than that, I would say. That's fantastic. You know, it's it always surprises me. You know, I'm just going to throw it out there. Today didn't start well for me, you know, and this is why when I come to have a conversation like this with friends that I know and love, but just professional insights and these great comments. Thank you so much, everybody. It's a wonderful thing. We just expect the best. If you just expect the best from everybody, as Christian says, you assume positive intent, you assume the best in anybody, and it's amazing what we can do with each other and help each other. So it's fantastic. It's wonderful.
Yeah.
And look at that. I wish Antimo was here to sing it.
Yeah.
Hallelujah.
And I'll add one piece to that is we can also have compassion for ourselves and for others when we fall short. And say,
Yeah,
yep,
make
another choice to do it again.
My question would be, fall short of what? Of whose expectation? My own or somebody else's?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
exactly.
That's
often what keeps us stuck.
I tell our clients, learn to forgive and start with yourself. Forgive yourself first, because you're your own worst critic anyway. Mm-hmm. And once you learn how to forgive yourself, it'll be much easier to forgive others falling short of whatever expectation you may have had of them.
Yeah, very wise.
No, I learned that. Not wise. No, don't call me that. That gets me in trouble. Shannon, this was awesome. Maria says this was extremely interesting. I couldn't have said it any better. Now here it is, with a heart even. There we go. And Jackie says, thank you for the great conversation. Oh man, this is all our friends are here. Oh, my friends.
Yeah.
Yes.
All the smart people we know have come to the table of Shannon, because we've enjoyed listening to you in person, Shannon, in different parts of the world, Belgium and Dublin, all these places that we've seen you do this. Everybody, no matter what background, what can learn from this, and it's great. So and also finally, we don't want to forget your book, which of course is called Brain Skills, right?
It's called Neuroscience of Inclusion: New Skills for New Times.
New Skills for New Times, right? Yeah. Your company is Brain Skills. I'm sorry about that. I misnamed that. Absolutely. I mean, so it is in written form. You can learn. You can you can go to the font yourself and learn. So we should put a link.
We should, right, Brett? We should. We should put a link under all the comment boxes of the internet.
you pad for a minute. I'm going to go and find it. So I'm just going to link. So we should just do it, the Amazon link, which we always do.
It's on Amazon. If you type in Neuroscience of Inclusion, it's the only one. It'll pop up.
No, we don't have affiliate links. No, we don't benefit from this. And this is what you're worried about. You can buy it at any store that you would like to buy it from. It's only, we give you one destination to start your research from. All right.
Absolutely.
So Shannon, thank you for joining us today. This was lovely. This was a wonderful start into our week, at least in my week. I can only speak for myself. I'm going to tackle these 11 million bits. How many? 11 billion. And I'm gonna tackle them 1 million at a time with my 60-bit brain, and I will form new neural connections as I go along this week. Hopefully, forming great neural connections that will serve me going forward. That's the goal. Intentionality, right?
Absolutely.
Excellent. Brett, thank you very much. He found the link.
I did.
We'll go buy the book. That's all we say.
Yeah. Buy the book, people. Buy the book. Buy the book.
Well, thank you, Brett. Thank you, Christian.
No, thank you. This has been wonderful. I'm glad we finally were able to make it happen, because it was well worth the wait. Thank you so much. You're very generous with your time. And of course, we'll look forward to seeing you again soon in some other topic. There's probably webinars and all kinds of things. You're in very high demand, as you should be, to pass this information on. Look out for Shannon and connect with her, obviously, on LinkedIn, all the wonderful socials out there, and we guarantee you will learn a lot. So that's it from us on the #1 show of the business of culture and the culture of business, and today about the #1 show about learning about neuroscience. How about that? We do bloviate a bit here, Shannon. You might have noticed we do we do stretch our boundaries. That is one thing we will stretch our boundaries. He's like blaming me for it. All right, guys. Well, thank you again for a wonderful conversation. That's. I think I'm being. You pair have got some real biases going on here. I'm telling you.
They're very supportive of our agenda. That's all right.
Nice. All right, guys. Have a wonderful
day.
All right. See you guys. Bye.